The very future of AFC Bournemouth was hanging by a thread, in League 2 starting the season on minus 17 points. In less than a decade, they were in the top half of the Premier League. This is a story of Eddie Howe's Bournemouth, football's ultimate rags to riches story. Bournemouth's history, get ready for a lot of graphs and a lot of name changes. The 1890s are here and football comes to Bournemouth, and in particular Boscombe, which lies on the eastern part of the tracks apparently. Boscombe St John's Institute Football Club becomes a more simpler Boscombe Football Club. Everlasting foundations of the modern day club were set in the early 1900s as Boscombe FC moved into senior amateur football and were underwritten by a certain Mr J.E. Cooper Dean. Thanks to his generous money, the club occupied some wasteland on Kings Park, quickly renamed to Dean Court. Guess where they got the inspiration for that name? And they still play there today. Of course, all the names have since been changed. The new ground births the new moniker of the Cherries, whether it's because of the cherry orchards nearby Dean Court or because they played in cherry red, who knew? It's probably the shirts though. And then relatively nothing. War hits, Boscombe are still playing amateur football, and when football resumes, it is only the grand 1920 expansion of the English league system that shuffles the deck. Now, Boscombe were simply entering the Southern League in 1920 before finishing second in what was now a league full of professional sides' second teams. Thanks to Stalybridge Celtic's resignation from the 3rd Division North in the summer of 1923, Boscombe were elected to the Football League. It was a fresh start, and given that it's Boscombe, they needed a fresh name change, so became re-encumbered by the lengthy Bournemouth and Boscombe Athletic, which I'm just going to call Bournemouth for brevity's sake, albeit they wouldn't go by their modern AFC Bournemouth name until 1971. Now they're in the Football League, the possibilities were endless. Instead, Bournemouth chose to stay put. Seriously, no promotions, no relegations, no threats of extinction. Nothing. Currently, the longest time spent by any club in a single division in the Football League is Newport County's 13-year stretch in League 2. In the 3rd tier right now, Burton Albion have been the most unimaginative, standing still for 8 seasons. That is just the blink of an eye for Bournemouth and Boscombe Athletic. Being that the 3rd division was regionalised, only one team from each league could go up, making it incredibly hard to force promotion. The Cherries recorded a handful of top 10 finishes before war postponed the sport once again. Upon its resumption, the club would go as close as ever to promotion, finishing second to QPR in the 1947-48 campaign. After a regression to 3rd the year after, mid-table returned to be the norm for the 1950s and the 1960s. The closest anything got to any real change was the creation of a 4th division, which meant anybody in the bottom half of the 1957-58 season of both 3rd divisions would go down. Bournemouth and Boscombe naturally did enough to survive. Then finally, with the 1970s came a divisional change. Not including war, that amounted to 40 seasons of professional football in the same division. Outside of the top flight, this remains, and probably will do for eternity, an English record. Naturally, the Cherries popped right back up to the 3rd division at the first time of asking. Blessing the 3rd division again, only now armed with momentum, the time was deemed right to become AFC Bournemouth, a desperate move so they'd at least be top of the league before each season started. The red and black stripes were introduced, and now that Bournemouth realised they could actually move divisions, they actually did it quite routinely, but most importantly of all, sensibly. In this period of relative vertigo, Bournemouth came out of their shell. There was the 9 goals scored by Ted McDougall in an FA Cup tie against Margate in 1971. There was the appointment of Harry Redknapp in 1983. The first of which a nice little footnote, of course, the second of which the real beginning of the modern Bournemouth.
Sully looking to bend the corner in once more, and Bailey in trouble. A goal! He trying to keep the pressure on. Morgan's jump. Thompson! It's 2! 2 goals inside 3 minutes!
This is often seen as Game Zero and a well-worn milestone on what would become Bournemouth under Harry Redknapp. Under the new manager, the club would gain access to the 2nd tier for the very first time in 1987, in the process winning their first title before being steered into the highest finish of 12 2 years later. But a season on, everything changed. Any mention of this fixture in the local area probably wouldn't prompt anything about Bournemouth's game on the pitch, or even the fact that it confirmed their relegation. No, this was the day Leeds United came to town and ransacked Bournemouth. When Harry Redknapp couldn't return the Cherries to the second tier and was offered the assistant manager's post at West Ham in 1993, the wheels were set in motion for an almighty rollercoaster ride. Despite promotion, quickly everything looked lost. 5 years later, the club announced it was going into administration. Financial ruin was quickly followed by sporting disaster as the Football League had to hand out a 10-point deduction. It says a lot that a former Leeds United chairman in Gerald Krasner was then asked to pick up the pieces, as he had attempted to at Elland Road 3 years prior. He was taken over from a supporters' trust that had long been struggling to keep the club afloat. Debts had spiralled out of control to £4 million. On the pitch from the final 7 games, Bournemouth gained 19 points. They took things to the final day after a win over relegation rivals Crewe, only to slip up on the final day at Carlisle. They were back in League 2, but it was only the start of their problems. There was the real fear that Bournemouth wouldn't be able to fulfil any of their League 2 fixtures, as Luton Town fell straight through the trap door to the conference with a 30-point deduction. Bournemouth might have evaporated out of existence entirely. Jeff Mostyn continued to stave off the threat of liquidation by pumping money into the club. He couldn't do it all on his own. As such, he had to sack the club's entire coaching staff. Kevin Bond went off to join former Cherries alum Harry Redknapp at Spurs. Meanwhile, a first-team coach by the name of Eddie Howe was repurposed at the club's centre of excellence. Jimmy Quinn was put in charge, but he wouldn't be able to see out the year known as 2008. Bournemouth have a dislocated kneecap to thank for why they are where they are today. It was the wandering knee of Eddie Howe that cost him his professional playing career, aged 29, and it almost immediately landed him one of the craziest jobs any manager has ever had to undertake in football. The retirement of Eddie Howe was the best thing to have ever happened to him. The former Portsmouth and Bournemouth player got his promotion to the big job in January 2009 after Jimmy Quinn's sacking at Dean Court. Bournemouth were busy orbiting a black hole called non-league football, financial oblivion, and the probable spaghettification of liquidation that followed. The Cherries had been docked 17 points and only returned to parity by December against Luton Town. 4 losses turned into only 2 defeats from 13 as Howe righted the ship, and the club wound up 11 points clear of the drop and safe by some margin. Had they not had points docked, Bournemouth would have just finished outside the playoff spots. Eddie Howe's first full season delivered on that promise, as Brett Pittman banged in almost 30 goals as the Cherries were plucked from their third-tier tree and were placed into the punnet of League One. Then, Eddie Howe and his quick handshaking, grandstanding, cue-pushing, grab-all-the-limelight perpetual assistant Jason Tindall left for the Burnley job, just another bump in the Bournemouth road. At the time, Bournemouth were attempting to crash into the Championship at the first time of asking. His successor, Lee Bradbury, in the meantime, sunk them into the playoffs. There was hope, though, for Bournemouth. They could be thankful that Eddie Howe's managerial career had stalled at Turf Moor. After the passing of his mother, he felt compelled to return home, and to his footballing home too, in October 2012. The Cherries had popped into 11th place in the 2011-12 campaign, and when Howe rejoined, they were in the midst of just one win from their first 11 and were more set on a return to League 2 than a promotion to the Championship. In the team now, Harry Artu had played under Howe in his first spell, as well as Simon Francis, Steve Cook, Tommy Elphick, Charlie Daniels, Ryan Fraser and Lewis Grabban, whom Howe would inherit. A solid call.
From the edge of the box seemed to be turned in by Tommy Elphick for a second win. The United midfielder claimed a couple in the earlier league fixture.
The impact of Eddie Howe was felt immediately. An initial 21 games without defeat was followed by 8 wins from a final 9, which were the perfect ingredients for promotion to the Championship.
Referente! He's done it!
Whilst there, Bournemouth stabilised themselves into 10th place, i.e. the club's highest ever finish in English football. The only ever time they got close was in the 80-89 campaign under Harry Redknapp. The season began under 1 win, 1 defeat regime, going down heavily at Vicarage Road and at the Gulf Arm Stadium before the bottom completely fell out of it before Christmas. 5 days before the festivities, the revival started with a 2-1 win at Hillsborough. Together with long and winding winning runs in the warmer months of March and April, Bournemouth were able to call themselves a top-half second-tier side for the first time. That, though, couldn't have prepared any cherry for the wild scenes of the 2014-15 season.
To all but seal the points for Bournemouth.
The season began with the same mid-table inconsistencies that were practically dreamland to the average Bournemouth fan who barely knew second-tier football. Little did they know that their 2-0 defeat up at Pride Park to end September would be the club's last in 2014. Signing off with a 2-0 victory at the Den on December the 28th, Bournemouth entered 2015 top of the table. The omens were there. The last time a leader of this division hadn't gone up was Ipswich Town 10 years prior. In fact, those Tractor Boys had been the second tier's only New Year leader to fail to go up since 1985. But for a wee February wobble, the Cherries were perfect. They ended the campaign 13 unbeaten and became champions amidst the more experienced names of Watford, Norwich and Middlesbrough.
Westwood to take. Gestet!
Big win coming in spectacular fashion. 4-3 winners over West Ham.
We're told that to succeed in the Premier League you must adapt or die. From Barnsley 98 to Blackpool 2011, they all failed to heed those warnings, played football as they did in the Football League and were quickly punished. Howe's Bournemouth, however, endured the Premier League despite playing the exciting attacking football they were built on throughout their rise through the Football League.
La respinta è corta e poi il colpo di testa di...
The season quickly became a far cry from the successive 5-1 pastings they received off Man City and Spurs in October. In the drop zone with Christmas looming, Chelsea and Man United choked on the Cherries in the same week. This team were going to be just fine. Despite 16th place and only 5 points off the drop come the end of the season, Bournemouth were comfortable. They tailed off significantly at the end of what had been an energy-sapping season. They'd just proven they weren't here to make up the numbers, but they'd have to do so all over again the following campaign.
Good ball too, chance here, and the Bovey missed it, plays it behind it, didn't.
Howe remained sensible in the transfer market, only spending close to £30 million because the club had recouped almost 20. In came more exciting signings in Lewis Cook, Jordan Ibe and Nathan Ake, all young and all built for the future, while shipping out names like Sylvain Distin and Matt Ritchie. The future looked bright, save from sticking 3+ goals in home games against Liverpool and Arsenal. Bournemouth acquired 4 more points than the prior season. In what was a Premier League table distorted by the Big Six's omniscience, Bournemouth's 46 points was somehow enough for 9th place. Now, of course, everything outside of the bottom 3 was still fantasy land for Bournemouth fans, but they had just recorded the top half finish for the first time ever. They could even claim they had defeated the champions of England in league competition for the first time ever as well. Leicester, who were definitely hungover following their title binge, came to the Vitality in December, only to be beaten by a Mark Pugh goal. That summer, for the first time in Eddie Howe's managerial career, he was allowed to let loose in the market. This meant shoring up Nathan Ake's contract on a permanent £20 million deal, with Asmir Begovic joining him in goal for half of that. Jermaine Defoe added experience on a free from the relegated Sunderland, whilst no key names were lost. Relatively speaking, we were still talking small potatoes here, but we should know by now that Bournemouth would continue to punch above their weight.
They'll be looking for plenty of movement. The two things come together.
Inside the penalty area, Umar Niasse!
Or would they? Entering November, the Cherries appear to be circling the drain. Of course, the fixture list did a lot of the heavy lifting in this regard, as Howe's side had welcomed both Manchester City and the reigning champions Chelsea to the south coast, whilst also visiting Goodison, the Emirates and Wembley in the former Spurs. When the fixture smoothed out a little, Bournemouth could enjoy themselves, thrashing a team with even less Premier League experience than themselves in Huddersfield Town 4-0. Sadly, thanks to a shockingly mean-spirited fixture computer, the Cherries were handed the trio of Man United, Liverpool and Man City all before Christmas, ensuring that Eddie Howe would spend the festivities in the drop zone. Then, the revival began.
It's Callum Wilson, it's laid off for Rive!
Get another shot away here, put in by Ake.
Everton, Arsenal and Chelsea were all beaten before February as Bournemouth returned to what was quickly becoming the home of mid-table in the Premier League. It was a record that said 5 defeats from the second half of a season. By the standard of any non-Big Six team, that was incredible. It meant that Eddie Howe's team were only goal difference away from the top half yet again. It was quickly becoming normal, as were, relatively, huge fees in the transfer market. David Brooks, Jefferson Lerma and Diego Rico all entered through the door for close to £30 million during the summer. Meanwhile, in January, Howe added Dominic Solanke and Chris Mepham for a similar kind of money. And by the time the window had opened, there was even talk of Europe coming to the south coast, and it wasn't to fucking Brighton either.
Fraser to the edge of the box, right footed from Ryan Fraser.
Wilson teases one in, King's there, across the face of goal!
The only surprise was that Bournemouth hadn't been able to take a major scalp from the first half of the season, even if they had run teams like Chelsea, Man United, Arsenal and Man City all close, albeit in defeats. No, these days, Howe's team knew their place. They were a mid-table team, and they had become capable of taking routine results at places like West Ham, Watford and Fulham, whilst exerting their dominance over teams such as Leicester, Palace and Brighton at home. Finally, in late January, the run of big shocks at the Vitality ended in explosive fashion.
Lovely little ball into Brooks, pulls it back for Joshua King! Onside, a chance to put the Cherries too clear! Brooks! Stanislas has stuck in, Stanislas the King! Watford Buisson, in comes the call, the header is there!
Sadly though, this season would be almost the inverse to the prior campaign, as for once, Bournemouth ended the season worse off than they began it this time, only winning 5 in the second half of the campaign. Still, it was another solid tally of 45 points, which, in these days, constituted a safe enough place in mid-table. Like their previous campaigns in the top flight, Bournemouth had been leaky at the back there, 70 goals dwarfing their previously relatively high returns defensively. But in the same token, Howe's side had achieved their best scoring return, netting 56 goals, something which has only been broken by the Cherries in the previous 2024-25 campaign. It was another season that was quickly becoming water off a duck's arsehole. Typically, Eddie Howe didn't panic in the transfer market, selling Tyrone Mings and bringing in defensive names in Lloyd Kelly and Jack Stacey for less than the fee gained for Mings. Also added were Philip Billing, Arnaud Danjuma and Harry Wilson, 3 more big young talent.
Solanke, and an opening for a second, and then taken it. Time to bring it down. Brilliantly taken.
And with their latest win at home to a footballing giant, this time known as Manchester United, Bournemouth had climbed into a European spot. Even though they would go on to lose their next 5 matches, it appeared to be quickly reversed by another famous win over Chelsea, this time at Stamford Bridge on December the 14th. The Cherries were mid-table just like they always were, and whilst New Year was rough, shipping 7 without reply against West Ham and Watford to begin 2020, it wasn't anything that Bournemouth hadn't gone through before. But then, something that we hadn't gone through before.
Good afternoon and welcome to Sky Sports News. As the Premier League, Football League and Women's Super League is suspended until April the 3rd due to coronavirus.
We mainly cover historical football on this channel, but if you want some more recent stuff like this video, click on this playlist right here.